Okay, I have 1:02 Eastern Time, so let's go ahead and get started. This is Krista Taylor, and for those of you who do not know me, I'm the Director of National Outreach at AAPCC. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the National Pesticide Information Center, or NPIC, and how you can use NPIC as a resource in your poison centers. Your presenter today is Alicia Leytem, who is an experienced NPIC pesticide specialist. She's been there for 2 years. And I just want to go over a couple of things before we begin. First thing is we expect around 100 participants, so everyone will be muted by the GoToWebinar system. Alicia is planning to stop at a couple of points along the way to give you an opportunity to ask questions. To ask a question, you can either type it in or raise your hand and I will call on you. If you ask a question verbally, make sure that you unmute yourself if you have muted yourself, either on your phone or with your computer microphone when I call on you so that we can hear you ask your question. Third thing is that this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on the members side of aapcc.org as well as on NPIC's YouTube page. So as soon as we have those links up for you, we'll be sure to circulate them. And finally, this is really important, there will be a quick 4-question evaluation at the end of the webinar. And we really hope that you'll take a minute to complete it so that we know how useful the information presented today was for you. You'll also be getting that survey via email, just in case you're not able to take the minute at the end of the webinar today to complete it. So you will have 2 opportunities to do that for us. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Alicia. And Alicia, make sure you unmute yourself before you speak. Take it away.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, it looks like it's working. Perfect. So thank you guys all for attending. The focus of the topic today is going to be, how NPIC, the National Pesticide Information Center, can complement the work that poison centers are doing across the country. And hopefully you'll learn some new things as we go through this. So let's just start off here. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what our topics today are going to be. So I'll start out with just a little background on NPIC and what we do, who we are. I'm going to go into some of our resources that are available. Then I'm going to describe kind of what a pesticide is, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and you understand the broad term of pesticide and maybe learn a few things about pesticides you may not have considered to be pesticides before. I'm going to go into referrals, when NPIC refers callers to poison centers, and also when it would be appropriate for poison centers to refer callers back to NPIC. And through that, I'm going to go over some risk communication stuff and also what NPIC considers to be pesticide incidents when we are logging our incidents. And lastly, I'm going to go into our website. There's a new database we've created that I want to introduce to you that may be helpful for poison center specialists, and we'll go through kind of how to use that and what the benefits of using that might be. So let's start out here with a little background on who NPIC is. So the National Pesticide Information Center, we provide science-based information about pesticides in order to help promote informed decision-making. So we make this information available to anyone who inquires. We're a cooperative agreement between the U.S. EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency, and Oregon State University. And we operate a toll-free phone service, right, from 8 a.m. to noon Pacific time, which is 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time, so it's just 4 hours a day. Our specialists come from a really wide background. We all are scientists, but we have a variety of training in different sciences. So that can range from things like chemistry, microbiology, to things like mammal biology and soil science. We have a food scientist on staff. So we just all come from different places, which is fantastic because it allows us to kind of learn and teach, learn from each other and teach each other. And as we come up with new pesticide information that we're learning about, it can be interpreted through these different sciences and different people's background, and then we all can understand it a little bit broader. When we get hired, we go through a long training period, and it covers a lot of topics. A lot of that obviously has to do with pesticides, since we aren't all coming in as pesticide experts. So we get a lot of training about pesticide chemicals, toxicity, but then we also spend a lot of time on communication, how to communicate, different types of communication skills, things like crisis management, dealing with callers on the phone, how to have a conversation with somebody where you're meeting them at their level to provide, the things that they need that would be the most relevant. So that's a little bit about our background. Most of the specialists here too, I should say, have master's degrees, so we are pretty highly trained. If I would like to know now kind of where the people who are attending the webinar, what your guys' positions are, so I can kind of gear my talk that way. So Krista, if you want to put up that poll question, that would be fantastic. Okay,
can you see it there, Alicia?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so if you guys want to answer that question, then we can get an idea of who's attending the webinar and just see.
Give everybody about 30 seconds to answer that. The spies are winning. The spies are winning. I see a lot of educators on my list.
Yeah.
We'll give people about 15 more seconds and then I'll stop. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so it looks like mostly we have spies, but then also a lot of educators, which is fantastic, and some managing directors. Perfect. Well, thank you guys all for attending. One thing I forgot to touch on too about, oh, there's the results. There you go. So now you can all see that. Oh, fantastic. That's a good spread. And 24% of other, which is really exciting. I don't know what that means, but maybe later you guys can ask some questions and let me know who else is attending. That's fantastic. Okay, so one more thing I forgot to mention is we do have lots of bilingual, we have a few bilingual staff that answer the phones, and we also have language line services we use, so we can take calls in over 170 languages. And overall, our jobs as pesticide specialists is essentially to be science communicators. So what we're doing is interpreting technical jargon for the general public so that they can get the answers that they need. And who is that public? So generally, it is the general public. These are kind of people using pesticides in and around their home. We get about 11,000 inquiries per year, so that's mostly through the phone, but also email inquiries, social media inquiries, or also voicemails that people will call and leave. About 15% of our calls are pesticide incidents, and I'll explain what we consider to be an incident later on in the presentation. And those other 10% of our callers or contacts would be from people who are somehow related to pesticides, but not the general public. So something like a veterinarian or a physician, people who are manufacturing pesticides, have questions about regulations, those kind of things. Okay, and a lot of times we'll get calls from people too that aren't necessarily questions that we can answer, but we're trained at how to find them the appropriate contact, so that hopefully they can get the answer as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we do this primarily through the phone, but we also have a website that has lots of resources on it. We have over 700 pages in English and Spanish on our website, and there's the website address here at the bottom. So if you haven't explored our website before, I'd encourage you to do so. We last year in 2015 had over 4.5 million page views, so that means real people looking at something on our website. We had over 43 million hits, but a lot of those are bots and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of information available geared towards the general public on our website that may be able to answer people's questions without them having to call in to ask those questions. Our top pages on our website tend to be our general fact sheets, and we've created these for the public to kind of answer kind of those really common questions that we get on active ingredients. And so these are the top fact sheets that were hit on last year. And the biggest web page, actually, the most popular web page, was the diatomaceous earth fact sheet, even more so than our main page. And so that just shows, how commonly that's being used and how much information is needed out there, and that people are really curious about it. So diatomaceous earth, copper sulfate, boric acid, permethrin, and glyphosate, all of these are things that are really commonly used in the home. And then these fact sheets kind of give them some information about, what it is, how it works, what the toxicity is, and those kind of things. Also in the corner here, we have a database called Find Your Local Resources. And so that also was very popular, and that essentially helps people find local pesticide or pest-related resources that may be able to better answer their questions as well. Other things that we have besides fact sheets, we make videos and podcasts, and we also do outreach material. This is a piece of outreach material we did along with AAPCC last year. And we gear all of this to try and answer what the pressing issues are in the country. Because we're getting calls all the time, we can kind of tell what the hot topics are and then focus our website development and our material development towards those questions that people are having out there. So an example would be, like right now, currently Zika is really popular and there's a lot of questions about insect repellents and those kind of things. So we're developing an FAQ about Zika, and we have been promoting a lot of our insect repellent information because of that. Okay, so the next thing I want to get into is what is a pesticide? In the legal stance, a pesticide is defined as any substance intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest. So when you think about pests, some of those common pests that you would consider would be things like rats or mice or rodents, right? That's a pest, and people are really familiar with that. Cockroaches or other, ants, things that you would find in your home, and things that are going to be used against that, insecticides, those would be pesticides, and I think everyone would agree with that. Pesticide also includes herbicides that are used against weeds, so like a dandelion, for example. So these are really commonly used at-home pesticides that people may consider already as pesticides. But there's a few other more unusual things that are also considered pesticides. So one of those would be insect repellents. So that's not actually killing the insect, but it is repelling them, which is included in this definition of a pesticide. And so those are regulated as pesticides through the EPA. Another thing would be bacteria. And you may not think of bacteria as a pest, but if there is something that's going to kill that bacteria, like a disinfectant or a sanitizer, then that's also a pesticide and has to go through the same regulations through the EPA. And another thing would be fungicides or fungus. So this is powdery mildew, something that you would find in your garden, on your squash plants. And so if you have a product to deal with that mildew, that would be a pesticide, but also mildews in your home. If you have mold growing in the corner of your bathroom, then those products that you would buy to deal with that mold are also considered pesticides. So a few quick examples of things that you may not have thought about as being pesticides before would be things like Clorox wipes or sprays, or anything that has on its label some terminology showing that it's going to deal with a pest. So anything that's saying kills 99% of bacteria and viruses. That bacteria and viruses is now the pest, and so that product needs to be registered and regulated through the EPA. Now, this doesn't include things like hand sanitizers, even though those also make those statements. Because they're used on human skin, they're regulated through the FDA, so it's a little bit different. So these would be things that are used to clean surfaces. Also, slug and snail bait, something that is used very often around the home, and we get a lot of calls about. Another thing would be pool chemicals. So if there's algae in a pool that needs to be dealt with, those pool chemicals are a pesticide. Wood preservatives are kind of an interesting pesticide because usually when we talk to people about wood preservatives, they're not the ones doing the application, right? The wood's already been treated before they bought the wood, but now they're buying a product that has a pesticide already infused into it, and so they may have concerns about that. So that's another topic that we touch on and we're happy to discuss. And lastly, I don't often think about like a bear as a pest, but bear sprays are also pesticides, right? Because they're being used to repel, in this case, a bear, which is a pest, depending on the situation. So there's a few different examples of what pesticides are. And here's an example of a pesticide label. So inside this pesticide product, there are a few things. So pesticide products are formulated, they're made up of an active ingredient, and that's the thing that is intended to kill or repel or mitigate the pest. So that's the thing doing the job of that pesticide. But there's also inert or other ingredients listed on this label. And so you can see those here. There's the active ingredient that says very clearly on the label active ingredients and the percentages. And then other ingredients. And most other ingredients don't need to be listed on the label. You can see some things, like here it says contains petroleum distillate. So some other ingredients are required to be marked like that, but primarily those other ingredients won't be labeled, and it'll just have a large percentage of other things that are unknown in that product. And there's a few reasons for that. So firstly, it's considered to be confidential business information. So when a manufacturer is creating a pesticide product, they have to turn that information over to the EPA, what all those ingredients are in the pesticide, so that the EPA can make sure that those ingredients are included on their list of approved inert ingredients. But then when they actually put the product label out, they don't have to disclose that to the public, okay, because it's considered confidential business information. And those inert other ingredients have lots of possible purposes. So this would be things like increasing the shelf life, attracting a pest, or helping the product work more effectively in some way. So that's why those would be included in there. Maybe spreading on a leaf or sticking through rain or something like that. And then those inert ingredients can have varying toxicity. So it's hard to know what the toxicity of those ingredients are, because we don't know what they are. But when the product is registered, it goes through a toxicity test, and that influences the product signal words. So the formulated product with the active ingredient and those inert ingredients has to be tested by the EPA, and then that's going to lead to a signal word on the label. And I'm going to touch more on what a signal word is in just a second, and how we can learn about the toxicity through that signal word on the product label. And also there's a more limited list of inert ingredients that are allowed in things like minimum risk pesticides, and then also pesticides for organic production. And those are both things I will also explain what they are in just a second. Okay, so let's go back to the signal word and what that is. So all pesticide products must have a signal word on their label. Almost all. We'll get to those unusual ones that don't. But the signal word can range from caution to warning to danger. You can see here with increasing toxicity. Right? So caution is this formulated product has a low toxicity. If it's moderately toxic, it'll get a warning signal word, and if it's higher toxicity, it'll have danger. And that really has to do with how toxic that product is through different routes of exposure. So something that has a caution signal word means the pesticide product is slightly toxic if eaten, absorbed through the skin, inhaled, or it causes slight eye or skin irritation. In contrast, if it has a dangerous signal word, it means that the pesticide product is highly toxic by at least one of those routes of exposure. Or it may be corrosive, causing irreversible damage to the skin or eyes. Okay, so let's go back to this pesticide label, and you can look at it now and see if you can find that signal word on there, right? It has to be big, bold, and in capital letters. So that would be right there. This product is considered moderately toxic because it has a warning signal word. So this is something when we're talking to callers on the phone, it's fairly easy to have them identify what that signal word is on there and use that to kind of frame our conversation, starting with this product is considered moderately toxic or low in toxicity overall. Okay, so when the EPA is registering these products, they use this toxicity category to determine the signal words. So I'm going to go through a few quick questions just to help explain, or examples just to help explain how they determine this. So we'll have 3 different products and look at what their toxicity is through these different categories and what that means for the signal word. So to start with product A. So it looks like with this product, it's considered fairly low in toxicity through all routes of exposure except for inhalation. When it's inhaled, it's considered moderately toxic. So in this situation, they take the highest level of toxicity for all of those routes of exposure and then give the signal word based on that. So this product would have a signal word of warning. Okay, so with the next product, product B, this product is considered very low in toxicity through all routes of exposure. Okay, and in this situation, the signal word is optional. So it's either going to say caution, or it could have no signal word at all because it's considered so low in toxicity as a formulated product. So sometimes callers will have a product that doesn't have a signal word, and that just means it's extremely low. It's considered very low in toxicity through all those different routes of exposure. Okay, and then lastly, product C. It looks like this product is considered very low in toxicity through all routes except for dermal exposure. And it's considered highly toxic through dermal exposure. And in that situation, if any of those reach up to that high toxicity, it's going to get that danger signal word. But in addition, if any product is considered highly toxic through these 3 routes of exposure, so oral ingestion, inhalation, or dermal exposure, then it also has to have the words poison and skull and crossbones on the label itself. So it's really clear that it can be highly toxic through those routes. Okay, so that's signal words. Now I'm going to jump back to that term I brought up earlier, minimum risk pesticides. Okay, so what is a minimum risk pesticide? We tend to refer to these around here as 25B products, just because that's the list of ingredients that are allowed in these pesticides. And it's a pretty small list of active ingredients that are considered by the EPA to pose little to no risk to human health or the environment. So if a manufacturer is making a product and only has these active ingredients, they would include things like garlic oil, dried blood, rosemary oil, citronella oil, rosemary oil. All of those are on this list. So if they are creating a product like that with only those active ingredients and all their inert ingredients come from a list that are considered to be registration exempt, then they must list all those ingredients on the label, and the overall product is exempt from registration with the EPA. Okay, so they don't have to go through this long process and get registered. And because of that, these products won't have a signal word, and they don't have to go through any sort of risk assessment through the EPA or demonstrate any efficacy. Right? They're not regulated that way. Okay, so those are minimum risk pesticides. Also, organic pesticides. So one of the biggest myths about pesticides is that organic food is grown without them. Actually, organic does not mean pesticide-free. It just means that those producers used only organically approved pesticides. And organic pesticides tend to have natural substances in them, things like soap, slime sulfur, hydrogen peroxide, but not all natural substances are allowed. Like strychnine is not allowed to be used in organic production because it's so toxic. And then also those pesticides must meet USDA criteria for organic production. And so then they can get certified as being organic and used by organic farmers. Okay, so with pesticide laws, they're all regulated through the EPA federally. So products must be registered federally with the EPA unless they're exempt, like one of those minimum risk products. Those products also have to undergo a state registration. So in every state they're going to be sold in, the state must also register that product. And that gives them a chance to kind of limit the use pattern for that product further. They can't expand it, but they can limit it a little bit more. And then when they get registered with the EPA federally, they receive an EPA registration number. And EPA registration numbers are a little bit like a social security number for pesticides. It provides access to a lot of information about the product. So going back to our fruit tree spray on this label, you can see that there is an EPA registration number right here. And it just says EPA Reg No and has a number with some dashes. Okay, so now that we've gone through and explained pesticide and pesticide products and what NPIC does, I'm going to take a brief second in case there's any questions or anything anyone wants to bring up before I move on to referrals.
If you'd like to ask Alicia a question, you can raise your hand or you can type in the box there.
If there's no questions, that's fine too. We'll have time at the end as well.
There is, hold on one second. Okay, Michael, go ahead. You are unmuted. Michael Bueller.
Sure, thanks. What's the EPA, the number that's next to it on the left there? Someone were asking to read off the label, they might read that instead. What does that refer to?
Yeah, good question. We do have people read those numbers off a lot to us on the phone. That's an EPA establishment number, and essentially that's showing where that product was manufactured or distributed from. So the plants that create this product have to get registered also, and that's just showing that it was made someplace that's been registered with the EPA and has undergone that certification. If someone is reading off a number, you can tell the difference because the establishment numbers always have letters in them. So I always say, you know, it's going to start with EPA, REG, but a lot of times they'll just start reading that other number. And if they start reading letters, they're like, okay, let's see if you can find a number that only has numbers and doesn't contain any letters. And so that's the difference there.
Okay, we've got a few typed in questions here as well. To confirm hours, are you open 7 days a week?
Oh, good question. No, yeah, we're only open 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and closed for some holidays. So we're 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Pretty limited hours. But again, if they leave a message, we will call them back on the next business day.
We have a great question that I think you're going to answer in a few minutes. Is there a database where we can access by EPA number?
Yes, indeed there is. We're going to be going through that, yeah.
Okay. For professional products, do they require the same warning, labeling, and safety regulations? So I guess she means for industry type things.
Yes, yeah. So if there's products that are not available to the general public, so things that are restricted use products, you have to be a certified applicator in order to apply those. They do have the same kind of statements on their label, the same signal words, and the same sort of regulations they have to go through. Yeah.
Okay. That appears to be it for now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. So at NPIC, we have a few limitations of things that we can't provide to people. So one of those things is we can't provide any product recommendations. We don't do any product testing, and we are not a pesticide advocacy organization, so we don't recommend specific products to use or whether or not they should even use a product, right? Because that's not our place. We can help answer questions if they're unsure about what they want to do. We can try and handle those situations and try and give them, you know, as much information as possible so they feel comfortable making that decision whether or not to use a pesticide. And then if they really want a product recommendation, we can put them in touch with a local resource that can help answer that, like a county extension agent or something like that. A lot of times at the end of calls you can tell that people are still uncomfortable, and we just kind of turn those calls back around and say, you know, it sounds like you're still not comfortable answering this. Or they'll ask us, you're the specialist, you're a pesticide specialist, what would you do in this situation? And really we can't answer those questions for them because we're not them. And the type of risks I would take in my own life might be very different than the type of risks they're comfortable taking in their lives. So we kind of frame that way and let them know this is really a decision you're going to have to make. But we do a lot of risk communication in order to do that. Another thing that we're not able to do is we can't give legal advice, which seems a little bit odd when coming to pesticides, but we do get a lot of questions in situations where, say, somebody is living in an apartment and there's bed bugs found in their apartment, and now the landlord's trying to get them to pay for the treatment for the whole building or something like that. That's really a legal situation, and we can't answer that. We're not trained legally, and those laws can really vary across the country. And so we also will find them another resource locally that can help answer those questions. We can't give application instructions either, although we have access to federal labels for products. Since those products are registered within every state and they may change the labels within that state, really the manufacturer is the best resource for that. So if someone calls us with application instruction questions, we'll forward them on to the manufacturer and get them in touch with somebody who can answer that for them. And lastly, we're not medically trained, so we don't give any medical advice or diagnoses. That's where poison control centers come in. A lot of times if it's an urgent situation or there's been a recent exposure, or especially if there's a kid involved, you know, we will give them the phone number for poison control, encourage them to call them right away, call you guys right away. If it's a broader kind of question but they're looking for a diagnosis or medical treatment advice, you know, we'll encourage them to contact their physician or veterinarian, or also help them find like a medical toxicologist that can help answer their questions better. So let's look at these referrals. So in 2015, we do document, you know, where we send our callers. So we sent 580 callers to poison control centers that we received. So we got about 11,000 inquiries last year. And so 580 means that we sent more than 2 people per day of operation to a poison center. And that's over 5% of our total calls. And so that has to do a little bit with how we're listed on labels. You know, it does happen that we get a lot of calls where they think we are poison centers, and then we try and get them to the right place as soon as possible. We also referred over 100 people to the Animal Poison Center as well. In contrast, we received about 186 referrals from poison centers to NPIC. And so that, may be a little bit skewed because we're only open 4 hours a day, and you guys are 24/7, and so that's a little bit different. And we really appreciate all these referrals, but I want to try and help emphasize who else you can send to NPIC where we can help answer their questions, and hopefully you'll get a better idea and we can possibly increase those referral numbers. Again, if somebody has a question about something and it's not an emergency situation, but you think that we might be a good resource, and they're talking to you outside of our open business hours, you can always let them know, they're only open 4 hours a day, but they will call you back the next day, because we really do like to reach those people who call and leave messages, so encouraging them to leave a message is highly appreciated. Okay, so let's go through when would you refer a caller to NPIC and what callers make sense to send to us. So one of those would be if somebody has concerns about past or like chronic long-term exposures to pesticides. So if they're maybe a farmer, they grew up on a farm, they're a pesticide applicator, or if they had an exposure in the past, now they're having some health issues, and they just want to know if it could possibly be related, right? So we, like I said, are not medically trained. We can't diagnose an illness, but we do have several sources that describe symptoms from exposure to specific active ingredients. And some of those examples of resources that we use where we can talk about those signs and symptoms and also the fate in the body, so where those chemicals might move and how quickly they're extracted, would be things like the recognition and management of pesticide poisonings, which is an EPA document. It's available on our website. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend you check it out. It's got a lot of great information about specific pesticide active ingredients and can be used that way. We also use Pesticide Chemical Search, which is an EPA database, and it links to NIH. And speaking of, we also use the Hazardous Substances database quite a bit. We can use we use the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. A lot of online databases. We have books in-house that are really specific to things that we might use. We also have our own online database that we can use within our agency, where we kind of try and pull journal articles, scientific literature on specific things, and then have that available for the specialists who are on the phone call. So we do a lot of searching for information, and we frame that in a way of just trying to explain what other people have experienced and what symptoms and signs may be related to pesticides. Okay, so what other callers might you send to us? Another one would be if someone has concerns about upcoming treatments. We're going to have something done in our home, or I think I might be exposed to this thing, or I'm going on a trip, I have to use insect repellents. Those kind of questions are things we're really happy to discuss. So there's two general types of pest control that are used in and around the home. It'd be do-it-yourself kind of applications, right, where you buy that product and use it, or a pest control company coming in and doing an application. And the most common question we get about this sort of a framework is, is this going to be safe? So I have a spray, I want to use it, I have a 5-month-old baby, is it safe to do that? And really, we have an uncomfortable time answering that question. We try to avoid the word safe. Safe is kind of a 4-letter word around our office, and there's a few reasons for that. So if somebody calls and they have an upcoming application and they want to know whether or not it's safe, there's 2 answers to that, really. It's either yes or no, right? And in many ways, that kind of sets them up for a situation where they're not going to get all the information. So if you tell somebody, yes, yeah, this is going to be safe, then they may think that they don't have to take any precautions, including basic precautions like ventilating their house after the application or avoiding touching a wet surface when an application is done outside. So if we consider something to be safe, we may become careless, or there's that possibility of just increasing the exposure to a product unnecessarily. On the other hand, if we were to tell somebody, no, that's not safe, then maybe we're going to try and prevent carelessness, but that kind of a response might cause alarm or anxiety about an application unnecessarily, right? So the best thing to say would be, instead of saying yes or no to safety, we reframe that question around risk, and we use a lot of risk communication. And so in an ideal situation, we'd always want to be able to talk to those callers before an application and then lay out what the risks may be from the application before it occurs. So when you're discussing risk, there's two things that you think about. One would be the toxicity of the product, and then also what the dose or the type of exposure to that product might be. And so we'll go over this a lot. This is one of our most frequent kind of conversations on the phone, is trying to explain to people, here's the toxicity of this product, here's, how do you think you might be exposed to it? Because even if you have a product that's extremely low in toxicity, if you have a high enough exposure, there can be, some dangerous outcomes. And to be kind of extreme about this, even if you're dealing with something like water, water we need to survive and it's everywhere. If you drink enough water, you could die from it, right? So we kind of try and frame our pesticide conversations in the same way. I'm trying to think of ways that they can then minimize their exposure to minimize their risks overall. And one thing that comes up a lot in those conversations would be something called integrated pest management, which is kind of looking at pest control in a broader sense. So instead of saying, I have an ant, I need an ant spray, you try and think about what other methods can you use to control those pests that may not even use pesticides and may reduce their risk quite a bit. So it starts from cultural methods, which have the lowest toxicity risks, and it goes all the way up to chemical products. And so some examples would be, a cultural method for dealing with a pest would be something like reducing the amount of water you put on a plant so it doesn't have a root rot disease, or removing food and water access for insects so they don't want to come into your house. There's no reason for them to be drawn in there. Okay, so kind of changing the cultural situation. Next would be physical and mechanical methods. So it's some things like pulling weeds, using a rodent snap trap rather than a bait, or excluding pests from an area altogether, putting on door sweeps, that kind of thing, closing up your screens. Next would be biological control. And so this is like using natural enemies. A really common example would be ladybugs to come in and eat aphids. But there's also biological pesticides that are based on bacteria or a fungus that can attack insects or plants or something like that. And lastly would be chemical, and that's what people generally think of as pesticides, those baits and foggers and liquids and dust and all of that. So this conversation comes up a lot in calls as well. If they're really concerned about pesticides or using pesticides in their home, then we can reframe that conversation into other things they can do rather than using those pesticides to still come to the same outcome of removing those pests. Okay, so who else to refer to NPIC? Well, we have a lot of conversations about chemical properties of pesticides. So if someone calls you with those kind of questions, you're welcome to send them to us. This can include things like, does it create fumes? So after this application has been done, will it be volatilizing up into my living area? But it may also include things like, how long does it take to break down? How does it work exactly? What's it doing to those pests? Can it contaminate the groundwater? Or is it something that's going to be absorbed into my plants and then travel through all the tissues of the plant? Will it become systemic in that plant? So those are all chemical properties, and those are things that we have lots of resources on and we can happily discuss. Also, another person that you can send to us is if someone has questions about risks to animals or the environment. The most common one would be risk to pets. People always want to take care of their animals. And pesticides are used on pets pretty frequently in the home, things like spot-on treatments. And so we get a lot of calls from people who want to use a product on an animal, and we can discuss that. Also, if they're having an application done outside, a really common question would be, I'm treating the lawn, when can I let the dog go outside? Those kind of things we can cover. And if there is an exposure to an animal from a pesticide, we're happy to also discuss that. So a lot of times, we do send people to animal poison control, but since they charge a fee, they may want to check in with us first and get an idea about what the level of risk might be based on the exposure that they've had. And then things, concerns for the wildlife, questions about contamination for the environment, and proper disposal. All of those are things that we also can easily discuss. Another one would be if somebody just really wants to document an incident. I think there's a lot of situations where people get exposed to pesticides and they just really want to know that someone's listening, that's getting recorded somewhere so that they know that their situation is not for loss, that it's going to come, hopefully in the future, be used in some positive way. And we document incidents. Our definition of what a pesticide incident is somebody who's had a human exposure or illness unintentionally, or an animal who's had an exposure or illness. It also can include things like drift, misuse, illegal applications, there's been an application that's caused harm to other environmental animals or plants, or if there's a container that's been leaking or breaking or something like that. We don't collect any personal identifiable information, so we only collect things like their zip code and then what the scenario is, their age, and then that information gets kept in our database and is available in case the EPA wants to request this information later on. So if they're re-registering an active ingredient, they may ask for our information to see how people in the country have been exposed to those kind of products, what a typical exposure has been and what it's led to, so they can take that into consideration when they're re-registering, or if there's other regulatory agencies that want to look at incidents involving specific products across the country. So that's something we're happy to do. And lastly, any other non-urgent situation that has to do with pesticides. And keep in mind that pesticides also include things like antimicrobials, so disinfectants and things like that, wood, preserved wood, wood treatments. So all of those people you can send to us if they have questions about the risks from pesticide residues on food, cancer risks, that's been in the news a lot lately with glyphosate. Those are conversations we have every day, and we would be happy to field those questions for you. So here's our contact information again. You can send them to our phone line. Just keep in mind that since we're only open 4 hours a day, we do answer those voicemails on the next business day. That's our email address. Also, people can send an email, or if they want to just go to our website and see if they can find the answer there, they're welcome to do that as well. So that's our website on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to take another little pause here to give another chance for questions if anything has come up during this referral section.
So we had one question as you were talking, Alicia, asking if the webinar was going to be recorded and archived and available for viewing later. And I just want to remind everybody that yes, it is. It'll be both on aapcc.org and also the NPIC YouTube page. So if you'd like to take a moment to either type in questions or raise your hand and ask your question that way, I will be watching for hands.
Okay, so it looks like there's no questions.
Yep,
should we go on?
Good.
Okay, great. Okay, so next I'm going to go into this database that we have that hopefully may be helpful for poison centers to use. So this is something that we've recently created. It's called NPRO, which stands for NPIC's Product Research Online, and it's on our website. If you go to our main page, the easiest way to find it would be to either type NPRO in the search box, or you can click here where it says Web Apps by NPIC, and it's the first one listed on that page, or you can also just type it in. So here's the web address. And if anybody wants to open this while we're doing the webinar and kind of go along with it, that way if you have questions, as you're using it, then we can address those at the end. So I'll go through some examples using NPRO so we get an idea of how to use it and why it might be helpful. When you first pull up NPRO, this is the first screen you're going to see. And so this just gives you an idea of what it is. These are the different tabs of things that you can use to search by. There's over 403,000 products listed in here. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. There's a lot of information available. It's essentially a product search tool. It allows you access to things like the federal label, which comes up as a searchable PDF through EPA's website. It'll give you access to the EPA pesticide chemical search program. So if there's an active ingredient that you need more information on and you're trying to find some information, you can click on that and it'll bring you out to their chemical search site and you can pull up some information there. And it has several different search criteria. Not all of them I don't think will be useful for poison centers, but some of them may. So it includes things like EPA registration numbers, right? Product name, and then who manufactured that, what type of pesticide it is. So that's things like, is it an herbicide, a rodenticide, what the formulation is. So that would be, is it a dust, is it a gel, is it a concentrate, is it ready to use, what are those active ingredients there, what's the signal word, so now you know what that means, and then what pests is it registered to be used against and where can it be used legally. So those are all searchable sites and also things that it gives as output from this. So it gives you a way to search for specific label information for federal products. Okay, so it was designed for professionals, and it does require some knowledge of EPA's pesticide terminology. So EPI registration numbers, chemical names, formulation types, and signal words. And we'll go through each of these a little bit. The information comes from EPA databases, and then we pool those two databases into one searchable format. And those get updated typically weekly, and so it's pretty current with what the ingredient or the products that are available out in society are. And it's important to know that there are some limitations here. So it only reflects the data present in EPA's data sets as is, and these are only federally registered products. So these are products that are federally registered. It doesn't necessarily mean they're available where you are, because each state also registers those, and that information is not included in here. We don't spend any time going through to verify the information that's on there, so we just take it as it is from EPA. We don't verify that label information. We don't edit any of the product information, and it doesn't include things like SDSs, because those are not regulated through the EPA. So those are things you can get from the manufacturer, and if you need to locate a manufacturer, you can use NPRO to figure out who the manufacturer might be, and then hopefully get to that SDS as it's needed. So we'll go through a few examples. One would be how to use NPRO if you are trying to find the active ingredients for a product without knowing what the EPA registration number is. And then we'll look at how would we find those active ingredients if we do have the EPA registration number. And then lastly, we're going to try and find a federal label for a concentrated Roundup product through NPRO. So let's start out with the first situation. So the scenario here would be someone calls, they've had an exposure, and they use this product, but they don't have the product with them. So what do you think they would recognize? You know, if this was the product, they had the bottle, what are they going to identify off of that they'll remember? So I think they'd probably remember fruit tree spray. They may remember concentrate, but those are the things that really stand out. So they give you a call, they say, I used a fruit tree spray, and now, you know, I have questions about it. What were the ingredients that were used in that? So let's go to NPRO. So when you open up NPRO's homepage, this is what you'll see. And so to get started, you just click on this tab here that says reg number, so that's the EPA registration number /name, so that's the name of the product. So we'll click there. It'll open up this tab, and then you can click in the product name field and type in fruit tree spray, right, because that's what the caller gave us. And then what we're going to do is just hit search this tab right at the bottom here. And when we do that, all of the output comes up down below. So you can see 304 matching products came up. And these are color-coded based on what the current registration status is of that product. So if it's active, so this is something that's currently registered and available, it's going to be black. If that product's been canceled but it was previously registered, it comes up as red. Transferred products are products that, you know, one manufacturer was making, but now another manufacturer has bought from them and is changing the EPA registration number for it. So those come up as like this turquoise color. And then restricted use products. These are those products that aren't available to the general public. So those are things that only professionals who have gone through some certification can use, are only available to them. So in this situation, we're pretty sure this was a product they recently bought, say. We're assuming it's an active product, so you just click on active, and that's going to filter the results down to just those active products. So now we got down to 25 active products, and if we scroll down over here, we can look at all 25 of those products. So looking at this, you may think, oh my goodness, there's 25 separate products here. But actually, there's a lot fewer. And I'm going to explain how the EPA registration number can be used to decode some information about these products. Okay, so each section of EPA registration number tells us something important. So we'll go through that. So this first section, the first number before the dash, you can see a lot of these products have number 4, and then a couple different ones at the bottom. And this product tells us who the manufacturer is of those products. So all of these top products were manufactured by this company whose number with the EPA is number 4. Okay, so in an EPA registration number, there's either going to be 2 or 3 sections, and the first section always has to do with who that manufacturer is. Okay, so the next number here, so after the dash, 122 or the 17 and 75, that section tells us what the formulation is for that product. So the first number is the manufacturer. The second number, so if this is manufacturer number 4, This is product number 122 that they've registered with the EPA. Okay, so they probably had products 1 through 122 already. This is a unique formulation. Either the percentages are different, they've used other ingredients, something. These are all unique formulations. So in this situation where there's all these 4s and all these 122s, all of these products have the exact same formulation. These are exactly the same product, but they all have these different names, right? So why would that be? Well, this third number tells us who the distributor is for that product. So this situation, this top one, 4-122, this is the original manufacturer and the original product. And then they sell their already made, already formulated product to other companies who relabel it and repackage it and sell it off. But they're exactly the same. So it may be that another company says, I want to take this fruit tree spray, I'm going to market it only to cherry growers and label it just as a cherry tree fruit tree spray or something like that. They can do that. They can limit the regulations or limit the label to sell it to very specific audiences and then resell it. But if you're at the store and you see two products that look really similar and you're wondering, are these the same or are they different? You can always look on the back of the label, find the EPA registration number and compare them. If they have these first two numbers are identical, then that's exactly the same product. It just has different labels. And then down here, these are also distributor numbers. Okay, so those are the 3 sections of an EPA registration number. So when we look at this list now, instead of thinking, okay, there's 25 unique products, how many products are there actually? Well, there's this first one, 4-122, and then all those distributors of that exact same product. And then there's this other one, 67702-17. It looks like the original manufacturer is no longer selling this, but the distributor still is, right? So that's why there's not one without this third number. And then there's this other product at the bottom that has a few different distributors. So actually there's 3 different products here, but that doesn't get us down to one product to determine what the active ingredients are. Okay, so with a name, you can get down to a small list. Depending on the name, it may get to the specific product. If they were able to remember it's a fruit tree spray by Bonide, then you may be able to click on this and say, okay, this is probably the product. But if they don't, let's go back and think of scenario number 2. Let's say they have the bottle with them and they're able to give you that EPA registration number. So what they would do here, right, is we just type that in. So on that same tab, instead of putting the product name, we're going to put 4 and then the dash and then 122, hit new search, and we'll get these results. 167 matching products, but we know because they have those first 2 numbers that are exactly the same, these are all the same product. And you can click on that first one and it'll open a new tab with kind of a descriptive page about this specific product. So here's the EPA registration number, the name of the product. You can see if the product is active or if it's been canceled, and it'll say when it was canceled. And you can click here to open a federal label, and that'll open a new tab also. You can see who the manufacturer is. And we don't have contact information here, but on our website we do have a database of manufacturer contact information, phone numbers, and so that's something that we often will jump between these 2 databases to get people in touch with the manufacturer if that's what is appropriate. You can see what that signal word is. Remember from the label before, it's a warning product. And then here you can see those 3 active ingredients listed. Okay, so this has got captan, carbaryl, and malathion all in it. And if you want to get some more information about those and go to the EPA's chemical search program, you can just click on those active ingredients directly, and it'll bring you to their page within the EPA's chemical search database. Okay, so let's do that third example. Let's say somebody called and was exposed to a concentrated Roundup product at work. So how would you find this product? And the only information they really gave you was that it's Roundup and it's concentrate. So I did a quick Google search for Roundup concentrate, and I came up with about 9 different products that look unique based on their labels that are all some form of Roundup that's concentrated. Okay, so that's not, that doesn't really help answer which product they may have been exposed to. So let's go back to NPRO and see if NPRO can do better based on Roundup and concentrate. So when I go back to that registration number name tab and just put in Roundup concentrate and hit search this tab, it only comes up with 1 product. Okay, but we know from our Google search that there's at least 8, 6, 7. There's more than one product with Roundup that's concentrate, right? And it's partly because the way that this search works is it's putting those two words next to each other. So you can see in this product it says Roundup, concentrate, and then some other words. So if it said Roundup something, something, something concentrate, it won't find those products. Okay, so instead, let's do a search and just see how many Roundup products there are registered with that name. So changing that from Roundup concentrate to Roundup and doing a search, and then trying to get just the active ingredient or active products, clicking on active again. It looks like there's 37 active products registered with the name Roundup. And if we scroll down on this list, we can look through here and see, okay, well, here's another Roundup Pro concentrate. There's also a Roundup Rainfast concentrate down here. And so it's really difficult to determine which product they may have been exposed to just based on those two pieces of information. Roundup is pretty good at having very different names, so it might be possible to just get the name, but not all manufacturers are like that. A lot of products with their federal labels will have one name, and then when you click on the label and open it up, it'll say, have a whole list of alternative names that they could sell that same product under. And those may vary by the state that they're registered in. And so going off the name can be really difficult to figure out exactly which product it is. But if the person still has the product or has written down some information and knows what the EPA registration number is, you can save a lot of time because you just type that in, hit search this tab, and we come up with just a single product. So let's click on this so we can get to that federal label. And here's our information that has brief description of the product. It's a caution product, it's a soluble concentrate, and then here's the active ingredients in that product. Now, I don't know about you, but this active ingredient is not very easy to understand what that is. It's a little bit, it's just a big science word, and it's not something that we would ever say on the phone. But NPRO has, and this has to do with the way it's entered into the program, but NPRO has a hover feature. So if you put your cursor or your mouse over this active ingredient, then you'll get a pop-up box that lists all these synonyms for the active ingredient. So looking through this, you can see that the secondary ingredient in this is diquat dibromide. Okay, so that's good to know in case you want to identify what different ingredients are. But stepping back, let's look at what happens if you click on View Federal Label PDF. So if you click on that, it's going to open another tab. So here is our search tab, here's that results page tab, and then the third tab will be the PDF of this federal label. A lot of labels start out by having some sort of communication between EPA and the company, some legal, it's not something we ever use on the phone, but you can scroll down and try and get to the section you want, or if you know what section you want to jump to, you can do a search within this PDF, Command F or Control F, and search for a specific word. So let's say we wanted to get to the precautionary statements to see what it says under first aid. So you can do a Command F for precautionary, and I'll jump us to this section right here. And here's where they list the hazards to humans and domestic animals, what the kind of risks are from exposure. So it's causes moderate eye irritation, and then emergency medical information. A lot of times on labels, I want to point this out, it'll say something like, you may contact blank for emergency medical treatment information. And when this label is manufactured and put on products, they have to put a number in here. A lot of times they put our number instead of poison control's number, even though we're not an emergency medical treatment information source. So that's part of why we have so many referrals to poison centers, is because of misbranding on the label itself from the manufacturers. And this is also interesting. I don't often see it where they actually have the EPA registration number listed under the medical information, so it's kind of nice to see that there too. Okay, so that's the end of my examples, and I hope that through that you help to identify that with pesticides at least, it's all in the EPA registration number. That's where the information is really based. A name is really hard to narrow down what the specific product is, but that EPA registration number is like a social security number for that product and can tell you a lot about what's in the product, who made it, what the toxicity is of that formulated product and all of that. So we use them all the time. Okay, so a quick look back at what we talked about today. We went through, who we are, what we do, some of the resources we have available, what a pesticide is overall. Referrals, when we refer to you guys, and when you may refer back to us, how we have those risk communication talks with the public, what kind of pesticide incidents we consider and document at our agency, and then also that NPRO product tool search that hopefully may be helpful for you. And with NPRO, because we made it in-house, we have the option to create another version of it that would be pared down. So if it would be useful for spies to use this on a call, but they don't want all that information, like where it's meant to be used, what pests it controls, because that's not stuff that would be useful. We can eliminate a lot of that and pare it down to what kind of search parameters would be helpful for you and what kind of output would be the most useful. So that's something we're open to, and if you guys are interested, you could contact us and let us know. Again, here's our contact information. I'm including my email here too, so you can email me directly if you want to. And also to let you know that we are on social media. I spend a lot of time doing our social media, so feel free to connect with us there as well. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or check out our YouTube page where we have a lot of different videos, quick short videos for information about pesticides or active ingredients. Okay, so that's all I have now, so we can jump back into questions if you guys have any questions. And I'm going to open it up for Krista to kind of deal with those. Yeah.
So I've got a couple typed in as you were talking. One is, do you specify whether a pesticide meets organic standards or not?
Wait, can you repeat that question really quick?
The question reads, do you specify whether a pesticide meets organic standards or not? This was back when you were talking about organic pesticides versus inorganic pesticides.
Yeah, good question. We don't have a lot of resources for identifying that. If it's on the federal label, then we can find that. Sometimes we can look at the state labels. They'll have a certification from an outside organization. So the EPA is not the one that does the certifying for organic products. It's either the USDA or the Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI, and they'll put their logo on the product itself to say whether or not it's organic. And then it's something that's usually searchable, especially through the manufacturer's website. So we can find that information if people are interested in knowing that. But a lot of times there will be products that have, like their active ingredients could be registered as being organic, but the product itself is not. And that may be because those inert ingredients are not on that organic allowed list, or it might be that they just haven't gone through that certification process. So hopefully that answered that question.
Okay, some other typed in questions here. Does the NPIC voicemail give the instruction to call poison control if the caller is concerned about an acute exposure or want medical information?
Yes, definitely. Because we're listed on so many products as being that emergency resource, it's one of the first things we say on our voicemail is we are not an emergency medical treatment center. If you're experiencing exposure, and then we give out the phone numbers.
Awesome.
And then our voicemail is also in English and Spanish, so it has both of those also.
Very good. Okay. Is the EPA registration number always in the same part of the label, in the same area of the label?
No, I wish it was, but it really can vary. We spend a lot of time with callers trying to help them find the number. The things I tend to say on the phone, our number is on a lot of those bonide products. So that product that I was showing you the product label from, they always put their EPA registration numbers under that list of active ingredients. So I'll say you could either find it under the list of active ingredients, or another really common place on other products would be on the back panel, the back label panel, towards the bottom by the manufacturer's address. So a lot of times they may not have their phone number on there, but may have an address. So those are two places I would look for. And then I tend to repeat to people a lot on the phone, it's going to start with EPA REG. So if they're looking for the EPA, and it'll be a list of numbers with dashes. So those are the two kind of most common places, and that's mostly just from me going to, like Home Depot and looking at pesticide products to try and see where to find those.
It's a shame there isn't a common label for all of them, like the drug facts label on over-the-counter medicines or something.
Right. Agreed. Yeah.
So you've got a comment complimenting your February 24th Facebook post. We'll have to look back and see what that was.
Yeah, thank you.
Question, are there any incidents that you are required to report to the EPA or any other agency?
Yeah, good question. We do have some incidents that we send off directly to the EPA. So if there's a group illness, if there's several humans exposed to pesticides at the same time and they're experiencing some sort of symptoms, then we document that and send that off to the EPA within 1 hour. Or if there's a group animal exposure with symptoms and or death, any deaths, we send that off right away. And then also if there's an incident involving bees, where bees are dying in large amounts because pollinators are so big in kind of the regulatory sphere and also just in consciousness on the public's mind, the EPA is keeping a close watch on that. And so we send those situations off right away also to the EPA. And if there's any situations where an endangered species has been contacted by pesticides or there's been deaths or illness to an endangered species, those also get sent off right away. With the state pesticide regulatory agencies, so there are state agencies, if there is like a misapplication within a state or something like that, if it's big enough, we may send it to EPA headquarters just to let them know of a situation, but we do not send those on to the state regulatory agency, and we really hold it up to the callers to be the ones to make that decision about whether or not they want to report those, because the state regulatory agencies are the ones who actually enforce the pesticide laws, and so we encourage them to be the ones to make that contact.
Okay. Do you have to type in NPRO to access the info, or is there a tab on the website to access NPRO? I think they're asking if there's a tab off of the NPIC main page to access NPRO.
Yeah, there isn't a tab on the main page. The easiest way to do it would be either to type it in the search box or to go to that bottom right area. There's a link to web apps by NPIC, and we have several different web apps we've developed, and so this is on that link as a web app. You can also, we have an A to Z index at the top too. You can always use that. Just click on the N and go down to NPIC's product research online.
Alicia, how would you feel about AAPCC making a direct link available to NPRO?
Yeah, I think that'd be great, for sure. If it would be helpful, we'd be happy to do that.
Because the spies might like to use that if they could access it faster.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any medical personnel on staff with your agency?
Oh, good question. We have a medical toxicologist that works with us. He's not always in the office, but if we get contacted, he's not available for the general public, but if there was a physician or somebody who is medically trained, contacting and wanted to talk further, then the medical toxicologist can call him back or call them back with information, have those conversations. So that's our medically trained person. We also have somebody who's a veterinarian for the animal side of things.
Cool. Okay. Looks like people are mostly preferring to type in because they just love to hear my voice. That's why. Can you tell us again where today's lecture will be available for viewing? I found the lecture informative and I want to listen to it again. We got several of these kinds of comments. The webinar is going to be archived both as a video with sound and just as you're watching it today. It will also be archived as a PDF of just the slides on the members side of aapcc.org as a resource, and it will also be available on the NPIC YouTube page. And I will send around to all the participants a link to both places where you can access it.
Yeah, on our YouTube page, we have a section in there, a channel, I guess, that has webinars from the past. And so if you're interested more in NPRO and want more description on how to use it, we have a couple different webinars in there that are specifically going through how to use NPRO and what you can get out of NPRO.
Cool. I have a feeling that will be pretty popular. Okay, another question. If the EPA registration number is the same, but the distributor is different, so the labels are different, can the direction for use vary for the product? For example, the same product can be used for rose bushes and cherry trees. Can the directions on the rose bush bottle, say that 10 times fast, state dilute 1 to 4, and the directions on the cherry tree bottle state dilute 1 to 2?
Oh, good question. So there can be differences in use directions between those labels, but they can't expand the use or make it. So if the original label from the original manufacturer says to dilute it a certain amount, the next label can't expand that dilution. They can't make it a higher concentration. They could make it a lower concentration if their label is specific for only one application site. Then for that site, it may not need as high of a concentration, and they can change how it's used on that label because it's specific for one specific place. In a lot of pesticide labels, it'll say things like, it's registered for 20 different plants, and in each of these plants, it may have a different concentration that you need to measure it to. And so if they're restricting that label further to only one of those types of plants, then they may be able to restrict the label directions for how to dilute it.
But you're still going to have the same EPA registration number.
Right, exactly.
On that product. Okay.
Yep.
Someone has asked if you have an annual report.
Yes, we have annual reports available on our website. I think the easiest way to find them is to go to that A to Z index on the main page and hit A, and it's listed under there under annual reports. And we're working right now on our 2015 report, so it'll be out soon.
Awesome.
Yeah, and you can see in the annual reports we document things like the type of callers we get, the kind of exposures they have, also what active ingredients they're being exposed to. Our most common referrals to poison control centers tend to be from mothball exposures, and also kids who have gotten into like bait stations for cockroaches. Is those calls we get a lot. And mothballs, the active ingredients in mothballs are actually our most common incidents that we receive, because people just tend to use mothballs inappropriately all the time.
Interesting. Yes, spies get a lot of calls about that as well. Any other questions? I've cleared out my backlog here. We'll give people another couple of minutes and then wrap things up. I guess that's it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. This has been a really great, I've been really happy to present this information. Feel free to contact us or contact me directly if you have questions in the future, or if there's other resources that you're wondering if we have, we'd be happy to provide those for you guys.
And please, 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 everyone do the little 4-question evaluation once we end the webinar. We would really appreciate your feedback.
Definitely.
Okay, we're going to stop. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Alicia. We really appreciate you giving us this information.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Okay, bye.